There's a part of you that no one sees. Not your partner, not your friends, not even you, not really. It's quiet, hidden behind every forced smile, every time you bite your tongue, every time you say, "I'm fine," when you're not. It shows up in your envy, in your rage, in your need to control, in your fear of being truly seen. And yet, this part of you isn't evil. It's not wrong. It's just part you've been told to keep in the dark. Psychologists call it the shadow self. And until you face it, it runs your life. Not like a villain in a movie, not like some dark monster waiting to destroy you, but like an old wound, one that whispers your choices from behind the curtain. The shadow self isn't something broken or dangerous. It's not a flaw in your character. It's simply the parts of you you've been taught not to look at. The anger you were punished for. The sadness you were told to hide. The desires you were shamed for feeling. All of it, the emotions, the impulses, the thoughts you believed made you bad or too much, were quietly pushed into the dark. But here's the truth. They didn't disappear. They didn't die. They sank. And in the dark, they grew roots. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who coined the term shadow, believed that every person carries a shadow, a side of the self that contains everything we reject about who we are. Not because we're evil, but because, somewhere along the way, we were made to believe that part of us didn't deserve love. And so we buried it. But what's buried doesn't vanish. It waits. And over time, it begins to shape how we act, what we fear, and who we believe we are, without us even knowing. That's what this video is about. To gently, honestly, begin looking at the shadow, not with fear, but with curiosity. Because what we refuse to face in ourselves often ends up running the show. To understand the shadow, we have to return to where it begins. Not in adulthood, but in childhood. Back when your mind was soft clay and your sense of self was still being shaped by the people around you. As a child, you learned what was acceptable, what earned you love, attention, safety. You also learned what was unacceptable, what brought rejection, punishment, or silence. Maybe you were praised for being quiet and polite, so you silenced your opinions. Maybe you were told to stop crying, so you smiled when you were hurting. Maybe your anger scared someone, so you taught yourself to hide it, even from yourself. These moments might seem small in memory, but their impact is enormous. Because with each of them, a message was planted in your psyche. This part of me is not okay. And so, without even knowing, you began to divide yourself. You created a version of you that was lovable, safe, acceptable, and another version that was hidden, placed in the shadows. That hidden part, it didn't vanish. It simply became unconscious. It's important to understand that the shadow self is not bad. It's not evil, and it's not a pathology. It's just a container, one that holds all the aspects of you that didn't feel safe to express. This can include what we often label as negative traits: jealousy, rage, manipulation, selfishness. But it can also include beautiful things like sensuality, creativity, wildness, assertiveness qualities that were judged or misunderstood. The shadow self is as much about our light as it is about our darkness. It contains our disowned potential, our hidden strengths, and all the messy humanity we tried to tidy up for the sake of being good. Carl Jung described the shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be. It lives in the unconscious, and because we don't see it, we often project it. Projection is one of the most powerful ways the shadow influences our lives. It happens like this. You meet someone and feel an intense dislike, maybe even hatred, without knowing why. Or you're deeply jealous of a person, even if they've done nothing wrong. Or you put someone on a pedestal, seeing them as everything you're not. In those moments, what you're reacting to may not actually be about them. It might be a reflection of your own shadow, a part of you you've pushed away so far, you can only see it in someone else. This is why shadow work is so powerful. Because once you begin to notice these projections, the way you react, the intensity of your emotions, you can start to trace them back inward. You realize, maybe the reason I'm triggered by this person's confidence is because I was taught to dim my own. Maybe the reason I hate their neediness is because I was punished for mine. Maybe the reason I avoid conflict is because I was never allowed to express anger. The shadow isn't just about the parts we hate, it's about the parts we were never allowed to be. Another way the shadow shows up is through repression. When we repress emotions, not just ignore, but actively push them down, they don't disappear. They linger in the body, they simmer in the subconscious, and eventually, they leak out, often in moments of stress, exhaustion, or emotional overwhelm. Ever snapped at someone you love for no reason? Ever had a reaction so intense it surprised even you? That's often the shadow talking, the part that's tired of being ignored. The more we repress, the more pressure we create. And one day, something small cracks the surface, and what spills out is much bigger than the moment requires. That's the shadow too. There's also what we call the inner critic, the voice inside that judges you, shames you, tells you you're not enough. That voice is often shaped by the parts of ourselves we've disowned. If you were taught that vulnerability is weakness, your shadow might contain a soft, tender part of you that still longs to be held. But because it was never welcomed, that longing gets twisted into self-judgment. Why do I always need people? Why can't I be stronger? The critic becomes the gatekeeper between the persona, the version of us we show the world, and the shadow, the version we're afraid to reveal. But the goal of shadow work isn't to eliminate these parts. It's not about erasing the critic or becoming perfectly healed. It's about seeing the whole picture of who you are and making peace with it. It's about wholeness. Because until we bring awareness to what's hidden, we live reactively. We repeat patterns. We attract the same dynamics. We live half alive, cut off from the depth of our emotional truth. And that's not your fault. You were trained to survive. You learned to become what others needed you to be. But now, you're allowed to become who you are. And to do that, you have to walk into the places inside you that were once closed. Not with force, not with shame, but with softness, with curiosity, and with the knowing that the parts you buried were never broken. They were just waiting to be seen. The shadow doesn't scream, it whispers. And most of the time, it whispers through your reactions in the moments that feel too big for what just happened. You know those times when you overreact, and you know it, but you can't stop it? Or when you feel ashamed after expressing an emotion you didn't even know was inside you? That's often the shadow stepping forward, not to ruin your life, but to be acknowledged. Let's talk about some of the common ways the shadow shows itself in everyday life. One of the most powerful signs is self-sabotage. You know what you want to rest, to speak up, to try something new, and yet you find yourself doing the opposite. You ghost people you care about. You miss deadlines you know are important. You reject kindness when it's offered. You stay in comfort even when it's slowly destroying you. Self-sabotage isn't stupidity. It's not laziness. It's usually the shadow, a part of you that's terrified of being seen or loved or changing. Because somewhere deep inside, there's a belief that says, I don't deserve better. Another sign is emotional projection. We talked about this a little earlier, but it's worth repeating. If someone triggers something strong in you, jealousy, hatred, admiration, even obsession, your shadow might be involved. Especially when your reaction feels outsized for the situation. You might hate someone's confidence because deep down, you were punished for being bold. You might judge someone's vulnerability because you were never allowed to be soft. You might resent someone's freedom because you're still locked in your own cage. That resentment isn't really about them. It's a mirror, and it's hard to look at. It takes courage to say, What if what I can't stand in them is something I've lost in myself? The shadow also shows up through people-pleasing a behavior we often mistake for kindness. But when being nice means erasing yourself, that's not kindness. That's fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being unloved unless you're useful, agreeable, or small. If you always put others first, avoid conflict at all costs, or feel guilty when you say no, you might be carrying a shadow that says, I have to earn my place in this world. And then there's the inner critic, that voice again. It says things like, you're so dramatic. No one wants to hear that. You're too much. You're not enough. Where do you think that voice comes from? It often originates in early experiences. The way your parents spoke to you, or how teachers, friends, or society responded to your emotions. And instead of arguing with them, you internalized their voices. You made their judgments your own. And that inner voice grew sharp teeth, patrolling your feelings before they even reached the surface. All of this, the projection, the self-sabotage, the inner critic, the overreactions, are echoes of the shadow. And here's something important to know. The shadow doesn't act out to destroy you. It acts out because it's been buried. It wants to be heard, held, understood. But most of us were never taught how. We were taught to fix, to correct, to suppress, to move on, let it go, get over it. But healing doesn't happen by silencing the shadow. It happens by listening, by asking, what is this reaction really about? What part of me have I been trying not to feel? Is this behavior protecting me from something I'm afraid to face? That's the beginning of integration. Not fighting with the shadow, but inviting it to speak. Because once it speaks, you don't have to fight it anymore. You can finally meet yourself, all of yourself, and realize you were never too much. You were never broken. You were just carrying parts that needed the light. Here's the thing no one really tells you about the shadow. It doesn't need your permission to affect your life. It doesn't ask, it just steers. Because the shadow lives in the unconscious, it bypasses your logic. It influences your decisions from underneath your awareness, like invisible hands on the wheel, subtly turning you toward the same patterns, the same pain, the same cycles you swore you'd outgrow. You think you're choosing, but until you see your shadow, a part of you is choosing for you. Let me explain. Have you ever dated the same kind of person over and over, even when you knew it would end badly? Have you ever sabotaged an opportunity right before something good could happen? Have you ever felt overwhelmed by guilt or shame that didn't quite match the moment? These are often signs that your shadow is calling the shots. The parts of you that believe, I'm not lovable unless I prove my worth. If I express anger, I'll be abandoned. I can't be vulnerable, it's too dangerous. These beliefs don't just sit quietly in the background. They become the script. And your life becomes a performance based on a story you didn't write, but you keep acting out. That's why this work matters so much. Because you can't change what you won't look at. You can go to therapy. You can read books. You can meditate every day. But if you're not willing to face the hidden part of you that's shaping your choices, you'll keep hitting the same wall, just with prettier tools. You'll intellectualize your pain instead of feeling it. You'll chase healing like a checklist, while your shadow sits quietly, untouched. The shadow controls not because it's strong, but because it's ignored. And anything we ignore becomes louder, sharper, more desperate for attention. It starts in whispers, a sudden wave of shame, a fight that feels way too big, a silent resentment. But if we keep silencing it, the whispers turn to screams. The truth is, the shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants you to come home, to stop pretending, to stop performing, to stop hiding behind perfection and accept that yes, you have darkness. But that darkness isn't a flaw. It's part of your wholeness. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That quote isn't poetic exaggeration, it's reality. When we don't see the shadow, we live reactively. We think we're unlucky, broken, cursed. But often, we're just stuck in a loop created by parts of ourselves we haven't yet learned to love. So how do we begin to reclaim control? How do we stop letting the shadow steer the ship? That's what we'll explore next. Not with judgment, but with tenderness. Because your shadow isn't the enemy. It's the part of you that's been waiting the longest to be seen. Integration doesn't mean fixing yourself. It doesn't mean becoming someone new or erasing the parts you don't like. It means becoming whole. And wholeness includes the parts you were once afraid to touch. Shadow work is not about fighting the darkness. It's about sitting with it, letting it speak, listening, not with judgment, but with curiosity. So, how do you begin? Not with a dramatic ritual, not with a 10-step program. You begin with something much softer: awareness. The next time you feel something strong, anger, jealousy, shame, fear, pause. Don't push it down. Don't rush to label it bad. Instead, ask, what is this feeling trying to show me? Where have I felt this before? Whose voice do I hear in my head right now? This is how the shadow starts to reveal itself, not all at once, but in fragments. Maybe you notice that every time someone sets a boundary with you, you feel rejected. Maybe you realize that your perfectionism is really a fear of not being enough. Maybe you see that your anger isn't just anger, it's pain that was never allowed to speak. These aren't mistakes. They're invitations. And each one is a chance to meet yourself a little more honestly. You don't have to go digging for your shadow. It shows up every day in how you react, in what you avoid, in the stories you repeat. And every time you notice it, you have a choice: to shame it or to stay. Staying means breathing through discomfort. It means letting yourself feel something you were taught to suppress. It means choosing not to run even when it hurts. Because in that moment, you're telling your shadow, you're not a threat, you're part of me. And when we stop treating our emotions like enemies, they soften. They stop screaming because they've been heard. Another part of integration is self-compassion. Not just as a nice idea, but as a practice. Because when you begin to face your shadow, you will feel uncomfortable. You might judge yourself for what you find. You might wish you could skip ahead to the healed version. But please don't rush this. Your shadow doesn't need punishment. It needs patience. It needs presence. You can't rush healing, but you can slow down enough to listen. And as you do, you'll notice something beautiful. The very parts of you you were once ashamed of are full of wisdom. That anger, it knows where your boundaries were crossed. That jealousy, it shows you where you've been neglecting your own desires. That sadness, it's a testament to your capacity to feel, to care, to long for more. These emotions aren't flaws. They're guides. And when you welcome them, even gently, you begin to reclaim the pieces of yourself you once exiled. That's integration. Not a perfect state, not a final destination, but a relationship. With all of you, you won't always get it right. You'll still react. You'll still project. But now, you'll notice. And that noticing is power. It's the power to pause, to choose, to say, I know this part of me, I see where it comes from, and I don't have to let it drive today. You're not meant to be perfect. You're meant to be whole. You are not only the parts of you that smile. You are not only your patience, your kindness, your light. You are also your doubts, your envy, your silence, your fears. You are the sharp edges, the forgotten dreams, the moments when you flinch at your own reflection. And still you are worthy, not despite your shadow, but with it, because the truth is, There is nothing in you that is unlovable. There is nothing in you that is beyond healing. There is nothing in you that needs to be buried to be accepted. The shadow is not your flaw. It's your story, told in reverse. It's your protection, grown too tight. It's the younger version of you that still waits to be invited back in. So let it in. Let yourself be seen. Not just the beautiful parts, but the full spectrum, the light, the dark, the in-between. Because when you stop running from your own reflection, you finally begin to see clearly. This isn't easy work. It takes courage to face the things you've been taught to hide. It takes gentleness to unlearn shame. It takes time, real, slow, honest time to trust yourself again. But the reward is freedom. Not the kind that looks perfect on the outside, but the kind that lets you exhale, that lets you rest, that lets you say, "This is me, all of me, and I'm not afraid to see it anymore." So if you take anything with you today, let it be this. You are not broken. You are layered. And the shadow is not your enemy. It's your mirror. And when you choose to really look, you'll find that even in the darkest corners of your being, there is light waiting to be loved.